Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. We are joined today, right off the top of the show, by the Majority Floor Leader of the Missouri State Senate, Senator Luetkemeyer. Thank you so much for making the time.
Scott, thanks for having me back on the show.
It feels like you're in a little bit of a new era of the Missouri Senate. Now, what that era looks like, I don't, but there is a different feel, and I think I've heard from folks sitting in that chair and in midweek update that they were excited to see you come in and that you had started off with olive branches to some folks.
Yeah, I mean, the conversations that I've been having with every member of our caucus have been really great. I think that people want to see a cohesive Republican caucus. I think that they've seen a lot of the dysfunction play out over the last 4 years and seen that that's not the best way to advance conservative priorities. And so I feel like we have a very collaborative group of 24 Republican senators that want to work together and put a lot of the issues of the past behind us and be very focused on delivering results for Missourians.
Well, just from my seat up in the peanut gallery, the beneficiary of the last 6 years of Republican infighting has been the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is for the last 4 years, the Democrats have not had to do a whole heck of a lot of filibustering because there's been enough infighting within our own caucus that they really haven't had to do that. So I'm hoping that that is going to change this session. I feel very optimistic.
I'm not sure Brian Williams even worn out the shoes Doug Labla bought him 6 years ago.
Yeah, that may be true. I haven't talked to Senator Williams about that. I never see him wear those comfortable shoes from Senator Leibel on the floor, which is probably pretty indicative of the fact that he hasn't had to have to filibuster a lot.
Let's talk about the top priority that you have talked about this since I've met you. Governor Kehoe, this is the thing he talks about anytime to anybody that'll listen, a crime plan.
Yeah, crime is going to be a major focus this session. When we had our caucus retreat back in November, it was identified by our own caucus as the #1 priority for us this session. We realized that the crime epidemic, whether it's in St. Louis or Kansas City, is something that, of course, victims are harmed by that, but it also has a negative impact on the state's overall economy. And so this is something we want to tackle. One of the central aspects of that is going to be so-called state control, the St. Louis Police Department. What that basically means is you have an independent commission of police commissioners who govern the day-to-day functioning of the St. Louis Police Department, very similar to the structure that we have in Kansas City. In my view, it's the best way to run a large-scale police department. It depoliticizes it, and I think it makes sure that the officers feel that they're going to be supported.
It got to feel a little bit like if they tried to do this in Farmington, I mean, Kevin Engler would have the guns out. I do think it's got to puts folks in an interesting spot to where you have, like last year, the Senate became kind of a planning and zoning commission for southern Jackson County, and your members made the point, well, if it doesn't affect your district, stay out of it. Well, what if Senator May makes that point?
Well, I think Senator May probably will make that point on the floor if I were betting. What I would say in response to that, though, is that the location of a landfill versus the running of one of the largest police departments in the state are two very different things. The impact on the crime has both in the Kansas City or in the St. Louis region, whether you're talking about St. Louis County, whether you're talking about Jefferson County, whether you're talking about St. Charles County, it impacts that entire region. It also has an impact, a ripple effect across the entire state economy because St. Louis is one of the largest economies in the state of Missouri. And so the notion that the crime epidemic that we've seen in St. Louis is just impacting one local senator's district, I think that misses the broader picture.
It is truly, Mike Kehoe makes the point, economic development and St. Louis crime are tied together. And I do think you could triple the impact of Ripley County in this state, or you could move St. Louis up 0.5%, and probably the rest of the state benefits more by that. And the only way to do that's through crime. I guess my question would be, my whole life, I felt like St. Louis was a little bit dangerous. I don't know about the stats. I mean, people question them. The internal sense of folks that somewhere is safe, I think it's almost PR as much as anything else. Do you really think if you pass this law, and let's say you pass another law next year, do you feel confident? I worry about the governor. Maybe he's biting off something that's not possible to do. Do you think you can actually make people feel like St. Louis is a safe place?
I do think that you can do that. I'm going to use Kansas City as an example of that. In downtown Kansas City, you go back 20 years ago, nobody felt safe going to downtown Kansas City. Mm-hmm. That has totally changed. People feel safe out in the evenings in downtown Kansas City. Obviously, the same thing cannot be said for St. Louis.
I agree with you. I feel safe in downtown Kansas City. I don't. Maybe I'm not much, but Casey, going to dinner. If she were to go to dinner downtown Kansas City, I'd be like, cool. If she told me she was going on Washington Avenue in St. Louis, I'd be like, hold on, who are you going with? What's the
right? Very different story. So I do think there is a way that you can sort of turn the clock back on, some of the things that we've seen in St. Louis and fix a lot of the crime issues there. I think state control is a critical component of that because we know right now the officers don't feel like they're being supported by the mayor. It's destroyed officer morale. It's made recruitment extremely difficult. They're down over 100 officers from what they need to be at full force. And I believe, and we've seen this in Kansas City, the way that the independent police commission structure works, it depoliticizes large police departments and makes them function better, and they're much more well-run.
And that was interesting. The Ethical Society of Police in St. Louis, a predominantly African-American union inside the police department, they were some of the biggest cheerleaders of this. They were extremely vocal.
Yeah, absolutely. You have Aesop, who has been very vocal on this. You had the main FOP there, who's been very vocal in support of this. I mean, this is something that the rank and file officers want to see happen. I also think that if you look at the types of people that Governor Kehoe is likely to put on that board, we just saw Mark James get confirmed today in the Senate. I mean, this is somebody who was a former state trooper, a federal agent, somebody who served as Donald Trump's United States Marshal for the Western District of Missouri. He'd previously been DED director. Those are the types of people we want running public safety in the state of Missouri. And I think that you'll see similar types of nominees on a board of police commissioners in St. Louis, that people across the region will say, these are the types of folks we want running our largest police department in the state.
Tell me about Amendment 3. Missouri went from really no abortions to one of the most pro-abortion jurisdictions on the planet. There's a lot of things that went into that. When I was on 2 weeks ago on the show, Senator Wolfin talked about the liberal judge that wrote the ballot language. At some point, your caucus is demanding some action. I know that'll be very tough to pass, but I've heard many of your own members say, I'm here this year to work on Amendment 3.
Yeah, it's definitely a priority for our caucus. And look, you look at Amendment 3, it passed by just over 3%. This was a very close election. Yeah. Despite the fact that there was a 10-to-1 funding advantage for the proponents of Amendment 3. They spent over $30 million, most of which was out-of-state money, whereas the opponents of Amendment 3 spent less than $3 million. I think a lot of the advertising that we saw was misleading and incomplete, and I think a lot of the Missourians that actually read the ballot measure in full, they voted against it because they realized this is a measure that is legalizing late-term abortions. It's a measure that is taking away parental consent rights, and so those things are all very radical when it comes to abortion laws.
I've got my own hillbilly litmus test. If you call abortion, you're probably pro-life, or you're very moderate on this issue. If you start calling it reproductive health care, reproductive freedom, which is what the language the left-wing judge that wrote it, which was, oddly, as I pointed out, Senator Wolfin, elected not the Missouri plan. You could tell it was littered with the liberal buzzwords. It was leading you to make a decision. Probably the worst ballot language, I think, has probably been on a ballot.
Yeah, ballot language is really impactful because for a lot of voters who won't take the time to dig into the actual underlying constitutional amendment they're voting on, they're just going to look at the ballot question. And so ballot language has a huge impact on the outcome of an election, no doubt.
On the pro-life issue, it's just me sitting up in the peanut gallery watching. It has looked before like they were, I don't want to say silly fights, but the pro-life movement was very divided. I think talking to people at Missouri Right to Life, talking to senators that may not have had the best experience with them, the seriousness of the situation has kind of snapped people back to forgetting about, what was some healthcare policy, whatever amendment 3 years ago. It's almost refocused everyone back together on the real reason why they were pro-life in the first place. Do you feel that? Have you felt that from members and from Missouri Right to Life and different folks that, okay, it's time to stop with the games and get serious about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think every single Republican in our caucus at some point in time ran for office in part because they're pro-life and they wanted to promote that agenda. And so now that we have one of the most far-reaching abortion laws in the country, people are uniting behind the concept that we need to push back on what just happened and what just got put into the Constitution via Amendment 3.
So let's talk taxes. Always up for tax cuts. You've kind of had you've been able to cut taxes and not feel the pain of it because of the ARPA money, right? So you are getting to the point, though. That money is going away. It's been spent. At some point now, the Republicans, the part I never hear Republicans talk about, it could be time to cut.
So I think that the balanced approach that we've taken over the last several years, where it's based on, cuts are triggered by increases in state revenue, I think that's the approach you're going to see us continue to take into the future. I do believe that it's sustainable. We have managed to cut taxes now twice since I've been in the Senate over the last 6 years. And despite those tax cuts, putting that money back in the pockets of hardworking Missourians, we have still funded government at record levels in almost every area. And so I think the tax cuts...
Well, it's not because of the system. It's because of the windfall from the federal government, right?
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. Most of the projects that were put into the budget with ARPA dollars, those were one-time funds. We weren't creating ongoing obligations. And so all the things that we're funding at record levels, those are ongoing obligations that the state has to, whether it's to higher education, whether it's to K through 12 education. So I do think that the ARPA money was spent on things that are, big construction projects that are going to be a one-time deal. So I think it's different. I think that ARPA allowed us to do some big projects that we otherwise wouldn't have done, but it's not really been used to be able to fill gaps in ongoing expenditures.
Talk about working with Governor Kehoe, someone you know very well.
Yeah, I'm super excited about working with Governor Kehoe. We, had a meeting with him yesterday with Senate and House leadership. The governor, his background, of course, is he started in the Missouri Senate. He was the majority floor leader of the Senate. He was the lieutenant governor. He understands the General Assembly in a way that I think a lot of governors really have not.
You might be the first majority floor leader I can think of that could call the governor and he would actually understand the problems you have with passing his agenda.
Oh, for sure. There's no doubt about it. I mean, yeah, the governor is intimately familiar with the struggles that we sometimes have in the Missouri Senate. And I'm looking forward to his leadership on a lot of different fronts. One, policy. I mean, the governor and I, when it comes to, tax cuts, when it comes to public safety, we're lockstep on all those issues, as he is with most of the members of our caucus. And then, he's going to be somebody who's going to be engaged. The second floor in the governor's office over the last few years was not as engaged in the legislative process.
Every governor starts off more and gets less by the time they're done.
Yeah. Well, this governor, he's shown that he's going to be an engaged governor. Yeah. Every day that I've been in the building, he's been walking the halls, meeting with individual members of the Senate, meeting with members of the House, and not even asking for anything, just checking in and seeing how people are doing. And that will pay dividends in the long run whenever he picks up the phone and says, hey, I really would like to have your support on this.
Whenever he wants to say, pass a crime bill.
Yeah.
I have seen something around town this session that's very unique. I have seen you take the lead in bringing together senators that might not have had dinner together all session if you hadn't invited them. It is, obviously, most folks say the Senate has problems. I think that's common sense in the past. It does feel like the groups you're bringing together, it's supposed to be hard to pass something in the Missouri Senate, and I'm sure it will be. It does feel like you're embracing a new era and trying to at least make a common bond. It does feel like a better place to be right now.
I agree with that. So I was having a conversation with Senator Searpoy just the other week, and he said something that's really stuck with me. He said, I want our last 2 years to be fun. I want to get back to a place where, as colleagues, we have these deep, lasting friendships that carry on after we all leave the building. There's no reason that we can't disagree on policy without being respectful and collegial towards one another. And so one of the things that Senator O'Laughlin and I both have been very intentional about is finding these opportunities to get members of our caucus out in a social setting. We don't talk about policy. We don't even talk about any legislation that's in the body. We're just trying to get people to know one another, because I think when you're sitting on the Senate floor and you're looking at somebody on the other side of the chamber debating with them, if you see that person as a friend and a colleague who deserves mutual respect, it just changes the whole dynamic of the debate.
And I think the only way you're going to do that is at dinner. You're going to break bread just like you would any. It's not that complicated of a scenario, and it feels like the karma in the place thus far, it feels better.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, there is a noticeable change in just sort of the attitudes that members
tension
have
in the area.
Yeah, there has been no tension this year. We're early in the session, and I understand that we're going to have blow-ups from time to time.
It's supposed to be. Yeah.
That's the way the Senate works, and we're not saying that we're not going to see filibusters ever again, that we're not going to have contentious debates. Those things will happen, but if we do it in a place where people feel respected and they feel like they're in a collegial environment, it just changes the dynamic of how the chamber functions.
Senator Luetkemeyer, thank you so much. Hope this session unfolds. You come back here on This Week in Missouri Politics and tell us about it.
You bet, you can count on it.
We'll be right back. Brad Pollitt joins us after this.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople, while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Missouri farmers have been doing what's best for their land for generations. After all, no one knows what it takes to feed and fuel a growing global population better than they do. So why are trial lawyers threatening Missouri farmers' best defense against weeds? Our farmers don't need to be controlled. They need to be supported. Keep glyphosate in our state. Show your support at TakeControlMissouri.com. Paid for by Modern Ag Alliance in support of Missouri farmers.
Data captured by our state-of-the-art monitors helps us pinpoint the timing and location of severe weather more accurately and respond to trouble more quickly. Ameren Missouri's investment in smart technologies like this is one way we're improving reliability and restoring power faster than ever. Responding to trouble before trouble hits. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back. This week in Missouri Politics Opinion Maker Panel time. We're joined the first time by Representative Eric Woods. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Representative Betsy Fogle from Greene County. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
First time on the show, fellow Southeast Missourian, Bryant Wolfin. Thank you for making the time.
That's right, Scott. Appreciate you having me.
And Brad Pollitt from Sedalia, the home of the State Fair and the benefactor of this terrific State Fair stein, which, as you can see, mom is full of water. Thank you for making the time, bud. I appreciate it.
Glad to have me. It's a one-of-a-kind stein. Now, we had to make that special.
Stein of knowledge tastes great. I need a little knowledge from you now. The crime plan discussed in the House and Senate this week. I mean, the main part, I have two questions. One, can you really make people feel like St. Louis is safe, even if you pass this and everything else? And two, local control. Is that going to happen?
Well, I think that we have to try to make people feel safe. I think that's part of our job. And, you know, I trust Representative Roberts and what he brings to those bills. And Representative Barry Hovis, you know, they got law enforcement in their background. And you know, we have to try to make people safe. I think that's part of our job.
Betsy Fogle, I have a very high admiration for the new governor. I appreciate the ambition. I do think to tie economic development to crime is very real. Can you really make people feel? I know the stats, and people argue about the stats, but can you make the perception of St. Louis as a safe place? Can you do that from Jefferson City?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those decisions are best left to the local level, and that's a perennial argument we have in Jefferson City. But absolutely, St. Louis has always been and will always be an economic driver of the state of Missouri, and I know we all are committed to making sure it's a place that families can thrive.
Do you feel safe in St. Louis?
I do. I love St. Louis.
Downtown St. Louis, you
Absolutely.
feel safe?
Yeah, I love the city. And by no means am I saying that they're not issues, but there are issues in my hometown as well.
But there are many, many parts of St. Louis I feel totally safe in. There are parts I don't know that I would feel that safe for my sister going to. Do you think the average Missourian feels it's a safe place? Because I don't.
think the perception is that St. Louis is not a safe place, and people think that that's the perception, and they're going to be hesitant to go.
Right. At the end of the day, you pass this legislation. I wonder if 3 years from now, people feel any differently. You might have different stats, but is the perception of site locators for companies, is people going for the weekend, can you really make people feel like St. Louis is a safe place? Is that possible to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. As someone who kind of looks on the outside of things typically, I don't know if Jefferson City can necessarily answer that question. I'm a big proponent for local control, but I look forward to having these conversations with our Republican colleagues and see what kind of solutions we can come up with.
Now, if the state government tried to take over the St. John police, everybody get the guns out, right, and shoot them as they tram into town.
And so consistency is a big thing for me, especially when it comes to state government and federal government, and it's not something that we really stick to a whole lot. So yes, I would not be in favor of Jefferson City coming in and taking over St. Genevieve Police.
No, Representative, my assumption is you're probably not the biggest fan of the state taking over the St. Louis Police Department. I will say this, though. They've had it for 15 years under local control. While I honestly don't think they have this stellar record that is completely impeachable, I do think it's a fair point to say you've had local control for 15 years. It is not as though you've made great strides in that 15-year period.
Sure, I think that's a fair point, Scott. But I would also ask, what evidence do we have that state control would make any more of a difference? And to Representative Fogle's point and to Representative Wolfin's point, I mean, in this building, so often, we have an inclination, the majority does, to come into cities and try to fix things. I think that really these decisions, should be left to the communities. We wouldn't appreciate the state coming in and making those claims and trying to fix things in our communities. I think more importantly too is that crime is not just a St. Louis problem. And so if we're looking at solutions to crime, I think we need a statewide approach. The continued focus on St. Louis, I think is not especially helpful.
Let me ask you this. I feel like Kansas City is a safe place. I don't know about stats. I don't, but just my inclination is downtown Kansas City I feel safe in. I don't feel as safe as Betsy does in downtown St. Louis. I think most Missourians probably feel safer in Kansas City.
Well, we have our problems too.
But I think overall, I don't view Kansas City as a dangerous place. Do you?
I feel safe in Kansas City.
Yeah.
You know, I've lived in the region my whole life. I love the city. You know, we have a crime problem just like St. Louis has a crime problem. Probably not as much, but we're also under state control. And so that's why I'm asking sort of what's the evidence that we have that that's the solution.
Sure. I feel safer in Kansas City than St. Louis, and that may be totally just my own emotional, non-fact-based decision or opinion, but I do feel safer in Kansas
Oh,
City.
I feel absolutely much safer in Kansas City than I do St. Louis, but I go to Kansas City more, and I'm more familiar with Kansas City. And, you know, I think St. Louis made a huge step in their new prosecutor a couple years ago and the new chief of police.
Senator Andrew Bailey.
Yeah, I've been to meetings in St. Louis, and met those folks, and very impressed with those two individuals and what they're trying to do there.
You're an eastern part of the state guy. Have you ever felt like St. Louis was a safe city?
Honestly, no. And as someone who's been all over that city and frequently or on the east side of the city, it's not a safe place where I feel like I could take my family.
I just wonder at the end of the day, if even with the best piece of legislation, if you can really change that perception amongst people.
Yeah, Scott, I'm gonna jump in and say, you know, if we all sit here and if every time people in rural Missouri turn on the TV and the General Assembly is talking about how unsafe St. Louis is, from a non-objective standpoint, that is going to be the narrative.
There's some.
We all succeed when the city of St. Louis succeeds.
Well, isn't that the truth?
Yeah. So why, you know, I don't want to ever talk down about St. Louis. My brother is moving back there this December, and I'm excited to welcome him back to Missouri. He's been in D.C. for the last 2 decades, and I want people to be excited about moving back to Missouri. I'm never going to talk ill about any part of it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be at the table to talk about solutions, but we should be proud of St. Louis in the same way I'm proud of my roots in Berry County. Very different places, but equally important to the state of Missouri.
I do think. I think if you just look at the math, St. Louis is the most important place in the state.
Absolutely.
Because if you're going to build a road in Berry County, let's be honest,
It's got to
St.
go.
Louis is going to pay part of the freight on that.
Yeah.
Give me a prediction, Brad. End of the day, does the state legislature take back local control of the St. Louis Police Department?
I believe so.
What do you think?
I think so.
Senate too? Actually pass it, and that's what happens.
I think so.
I definitely think the path is getting bigger.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
I think Mike Kehoe is going to be wearing a green tie, signing that bill in the city of St. Louis. My next question: 3 years from now, if this bill passes, do you think the perception of St. Louis as a safe city exists?
Well, I think we have to move toward, and I agree with Betsy. I agree with Representative Wood that all you hear is the bad things about St. Louis, and you know, 30% or more of our revenue comes from St. Louis.
Yeah.
But what I hear is when companies say we're leaving or we're not going to move there because we don't feel our employees are safe, we have to change that perspective.
What do you think?
I think the perception in 3 years does not change. Maybe 20 years, but
I
3
hate
years
to
is
say, maybe
short
it's
of
our
time.
CMO pessimism. I do worry that whatever you pass, the stats may change. The perception, does it change?
I think when the majority party takes credit for something and, you know, got their wish, that there's going to
Responsibility.
they're going to have a motivation to make things look better, because this has been a battle between the caucuses for years. And if they win, then they're going to want to make it look better, which means the narrative in the building will change.
I think state control alone is not going to change the perception, but I think if state control gets partnered with some of the other crime initiatives that I think Kehoe and some of the majority are going to be pushing, that narrative can be created. But I don't think, you know, like Betsy just mentioned, by the majority are going to want to take credit for that. But I don't think state control itself is going to change that perception.
You know, if we can keep, again, if the prosecutor and the chief of police stay, that's huge, I think, for consistency over a 5-6 year period. I think that's going to make a big difference.
Let's talk about the state budget. Something you know very well, Representative Fogle. The tax cuts. Everybody loves a tax cut. Wonderful thing.
Yeah.
However, the shortfalls have been able to be papered over by the ARPA money and the windfall from Washington. If you cut taxes again, I think the funny math is over. Now the next time you cut taxes, which is a fine argument. Now you have to pick stuff to actually cut out of state government.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, it is popular and easy to say you're going to cut taxes, and it's relatively easy to do so. In the state of Missouri, you know, with the way things are laid out, it is very difficult to then supplant or create that revenue when you need to, because we can't just do it through the legislature. It has to go to the vote of the people to increase taxes. So when we're looking at the fiscal reality of this year and subsequent years. I think we need to be very careful. We have the State of the State coming up on Tuesday. I expect that we continue to fully fund education, fully fund the transportation of education, that we make investments in higher education. If we cannot do those basic things that I know are important to all of us, we should not be having a conversation about tax cuts.
What do you think? You know the numbers as well as anybody. You've lived off a little bit of that windfall to paper over. But I think if you cut taxes again, and which is a fine argument to make, but now it's going to be like, okay, what services are you cutting?
Yeah, and our cities and our counties and our schools have said, if we continue to cut, what are we going to cut out? And I think that we really need to look at what are we going to cut when we cut taxes. My party has a strong push to cut corporate taxes, and corporations aren't asking for those taxes to be cut. They're asking for infrastructure, employees, what they're asking for. So I think we have to be careful, but I do think we have to look at marginal cuts on income tax. I know that was Governor Kehoe's one of his things, and I think we have to look at those.
You come in with a fresh approach. I do think the easy tax cuts are over. Now they're going to have to be tied to actual government cuts as well.
Yeah, so the reality is we still take more money from Missourians than we ever have before. And now that the federal funding is gone, there's a lot of non-essential spending that the state currently appropriates for that I think that's where you start. You start cutting and hacking and slashing on those non-essentials and go from there.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and argue that when we cut, what we cut is our education funding. That's always the first to go. And
that's the biggest thing.
Argue that is very essential. We can't cut Medicaid funding, which would be another bucket to cut from, because those are $3 to $1 that we get from the federal government. It doesn't make sense to cut there. What will be cut is the work that Representative Pollitt spent his life doing, and the kids back home. So I think we need to be careful.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think when we talk about non-essential services that the state are funding, so many of our programs and our state services are critically underfunded already. And so, you're cutting through to the bone. And I think people try to make this argument that taking in less money and spending less money is fiscal responsibility. But fiscal responsibility is paying our bills and meeting the needs of the people of the state and making sure that those services are funded, like education, corrections,
we have to
health.
Time response. We're going to kick off the air. Representative Pollitt, with a minute left, who won the week?
Michael O'Donnell and his appointment to
It's nice to see a good man.
Yeah.
Good things happen.
He knows more about that than I bet anybody in the state.
He would be very easy to know more than me. Who won the week?
I think the entire legislature with committees assigned, and now it's time to get to work.
Won the week?
I think it was made very clear at the inauguration of our new president that if you're a billionaire in this country, Donald Trump will be fighting for you, and you will be his priority. So I think if you're a billionaire in the United States, you got a guy in the White House that's looking out for your best interest.
Billionaires won the week.
Yeah.
That's the first time for that.
They usually do. My answer is freshman House Democrats. We had a number of hearings this week for the first time. We had a lot of our new members go in and ask really terrific questions, be really engaged. They clearly read the bills.
You get dinner over at the court, too?
What's that?
Did you get dinner over at the court?
No.
Oh, dang. I'll tell you what, I'm going to say my buddy Jeff Schrag, who's running for mayor of Springfield. I tell you what, there's every town needs a spark plug. Cliff Smart filled that role for a long time. Jeff Schrag will make a terrific replacement as not just the mayor, but the community leader. Hope you'll join us back here next week for This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics is sponsored by the Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, Ameren, Spire, the United Electric Cooperative, and the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts.